Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Hello at the back. Hello at the front. Hello at the sides, the middle. Hello, world. Can you hear me all right at the back? Can you hear? Yeah? Okay, good. Right. Here we are, lecture 2. You'll need notepads for this one. This is probably the most difficult lecture that we'll have during the course of this semester, because there's a lot to cram in, and this is the kind of basic areas that we need to understand, from which everything else falls out. So today we're talking about organisational structures and starting to look at the classical view of this module called Organising for Business. You may recall from last week I mentioned that we're looking at organising for business in terms of 4 structures or 4 contexts. The classical view and the neoclassical view, the contemporary view, the contextual view, and the componential view. So all we're trying to do really is to find ways and understand the ways and means by which people have attempted to define and understand and visualize these things called organizations doing this thing called business. So we're looking at the classical view. The classical view is the original viewpoints. So last week we started looking at the future of work. We started to look at your career and the context of your future career. And in the seminars we started looking also at structures. We looked at the development of organizations, we looked at the Industrial Revolution, and we started to look at organisational charts, again with a way to try to understand how we can describe organisations. We looked at Coventry University as an organisational chart and attempted to understand how that chart describes what is, we came to the conclusion, was a functional organisation with a tool hierarchy. And we'll be looking today at the alternatives to that. We also set up case study groups. So there are groups in each of the seminar groups who will be looking at case studies. During the seminars during the course of this week, we're looking at McDonald's and individual case studies in an attempt again to try and understand what similarities and differences there are amongst organisations that we're interested in. So let's first of all look at organisational structures. So this is just an introductory section. The lecture slides are all either available or will be immediately available on Moodle. So what I want you to do really is just try and get an understanding of how these things fit together. So don't necessarily write down the notes specifically unless there are particular aspects that you are interested in, but just try and link things together and we can discuss them during the seminar groups. So we talked also in the seminars about what we meant by organising and what we meant by business. And we came up generally with a kind of definition that looked at organising for business means the means by which individuals are grouped and coordinated to achieve common tasks and goals such as profit or market share. Various groups will have come up with different definitions, but that's the kind of thing that we're starting to look at. So organising for business, what does it mean? So what do we mean by an organisational structure? So we're starting to look at quotes here from various learned authors as they have attempted over the last 100 or so years to define organisations and business. So as a generalisation, an organisational structure is the way in which it divides labour in tasks and then coordinates the various people undertaking those tasks. So it's important that we have a useful organisational structure, because without a useful organisational structure, however good the people are, the work that they will be doing will be inefficient. So the structure requires activities amongst the people or the employees working within that structure to act coherently and efficiently, and to identify those instances where individuals or groups or teams are not working as they should be. One of the things we looked at last week with the organisational chart for Coventry University is we looked at and gained an understanding of the means by which this huge organisation, £100 million organisation, 22,000 customers going through at any one time, manages to achieve and process this large number of activities on a consistent basis. Organising then is the process of determining who will perform the tasks needed to achieve organisational objectives, the resources to be used, and the way those tasks will be managed. So we've got some outline of quotations here talking about organising, organisational structures, and organisation. So let's look a little more closely at this statement. The structure is important because it provides a framework, a general understanding that we can all understand as to who's doing what and what the key business objectives are that we are all trying to achieve. It clearly allocates specific tasks to specific people, and the clearer those definitions, the less difficulty will there be with people crossing boundaries or doing each other's roles or not doing the roles that they're supposed to be or not undertaking their roles to the best level of their ability. It coordinates activities and it identifies the resources, whatever they may be, whether they're individuals, assets, photocopiers, printers, computers, whatever it might be. It identifies whatever is required to undertake those tasks to fulfill the organisation's objectives. Various authors. One of the most significant that we're going to start off with is this gentleman called Ulrich. 10 Principles of Organisation. So what you'll find is authors come up with quotations and lists, and the difficulty that you have in an exam situation or in an essay situation is working out which are the best lists, which are the best quotations, and which are the best references for you to use. The ones that I'm identifying in these lectures are the ones that one would consider to be the basic ones that you should know. So when you're writing an exam question or an essay question, to gain marks for wider reading, which if you look on the marking guides will be 70% plus, wider readings means in addition to the slides that you have seen in the lecture. If you can quote the slides and readings that you've read in the lecture, that's great, but it's not wider reading. So there are a number of objectives here, and we're going to look at a couple of them in more detail. So Ulrich here has defined 10 key concepts or 10 key definitions of what makes up an organisation. The first one we're going to look at is specialisation. We're not spending much time on each of these. The slides are available on Moodle. As I say, I just wanted to get through the first set of theories and models so that we can get an understanding of how this thought process is structured. So specialisation or division of labour. One of the key facets of any organisation is division of labour. So I'm in the lecturing staff. I'm a senior lecturer in the academic unit. I don't do administration. We have administrators who do that. I don't do cleaning because we have an estates department who do that. I don't do international development because we have an international development arm for that. So I have a series of responsibilities which are based upon a job description, and I know that I can meet that job description because I've been recruited through a process that has identified that I have particular skills, experiences and qualities that suit me to do this particular role. So there are distinct advantages then to specialisation. The first one is that I can then develop expertise and experience in a specific area, and over a period of years may wish to grow a career or may wish to simply specialise. I can then be more efficient. So this task here, for instance, to deliver this lecture, I could be doing the same sort of lecture next year. I might wish to refine it, but it makes it much more efficient for me to do this again next semester or next year than someone else come in and create the new materials. There are disadvantages, of course, to specialisation. In some instances, some roles can be quite monotonous or boring or too regular. Sometimes there's a little opportunity, if you have a very specific specialisation, of being part of a team. The academic staff, for instance, generally work together, but we're not a team as such because we're not working together on a clear objective. We're individuals as part of a group. So the best way of having some form of specialisation is to have a specialisation and then some other skills and attributes that allow you to mix more freely with other groups. Another one of Ulrich's 10 considerations is a thing called span of control. Now, span of control is simply an understanding of how big or wide the hierarchy needs to be. what you'll have seen from the Coventry University chart, organisational chart, is not only does it have quite a wide span of control, it also has quite a deep span of control. So there's a large number of people reporting to an individual, and underneath them there's also an increasingly larger number of people reporting to those individuals. Generally speaking, there's no right number for a span of control, but it's generally considered to be 5 or 6. You'll have seen that Coventry University's is something like 9. That doesn't mean it's inefficient, it just means that the people within that management structure have to work more carefully to ensure that the people reporting to them are managed efficiently. So we have a thing also called authority and responsibility. So we have structures, we have specialization, we have spans of control, and we have these things called authority and responsibility. Authority then is the right of a person in a specified role to make decisions, to allocate resources or give instructions. So I have a clear formal authority in my role. Managers will have a clear formal authority in their role. So in addition to the specialization of the task, one also has delegated authority. Delegated means it has been given to me to work within certain parameters. In addition to the authority, there's also responsibility. So I have certain tasks that I have to do, certain authorities and decisions that I can make, and then certain wider responsibilities towards, for instance, students. There's also this thing called chain of command. And this chain of command is something we started to look at last week also within the university organisational chart. We looked at, in the university organisational chart, there were 2 lines, if you may recall. One was a dotted line and one was a straight line. Generally speaking, in organisational charts, dotted lines mean there's an indirect responsibility in reporting structure, and a thick line usually means there's a direct line of responsibility in reporting. So we saw with John Latham at the top a series of people called Deputy Vice Chancellors who have a thick line reporting to John Latham. So John Latham is what's called their line manager. So they report to him through that line of organisation. Whereas there are others who have a dotted line responsibility to John Latham, our Vice Chancellor. And that means they work with John Latham and report to John Latham for tasks, but their actual manager in terms of hours and responsibilities and pay and structure will be someone else. So that allows us then to start thinking about types of organisations. I mentioned that Coventry University was a very tall structure. That means it has high level of people called Vice Chancellors and Deputy Vice Chancellors, then Pro-Vice Chancellors, and then managed underneath them, and then Deans of Faculties and Associate Deans of Faculties, and then Heads of Departments, and then Associate Heads of Department, and down at the bottom there's kind of me, really. So that's a very tall organisation. There's quite a distance between me and John Latham in terms of management structures. A flat organisation is a different kind of organisation, and we'll look at later on during the course of the semester why you might have these different types of organisations. A flat organisation then is one where there isn't much reporting structure. There's a very clear, close link between the person doing the task and the person who wants the task completed. That often allows for clear communication. It often allows for creativity. So when we think of a flat organisation, one of the companies that we first think of is Google. Google, generally speaking, does not have a tall functional hierarchy. It has a much slimmer, flatter hierarchy. It allows people to take much more responsibility for a wider range of their tasks and role. We'll look at Google in a few weeks' time. There are different types of organisational structures, as we started to look at also, and we have terms for those: simple, functional, divisional, matrix, networking, and learning. So these are all different types of organisations. And the importance of all of this to you, to keep reiterating, is this is not an academic subject alone. This is important to you because you'll find yourselves in organisations, and you will need to find how you work within those organisations. and understanding the structure and the organisational chart and the formal reporting will allow you to have a greater chance of succeeding. So let's quickly look at these different types of organisational structures. So the first one is a simple organisation, and generally speaking these might be considered to be the kind of one-man business or the very small business where it's geared around the boss. There isn't much reporting, people are working together, and if the boss is in, things get done, and maybe if the boss isn't in, things don't get done so much or so well. It's geared around one person, and that works fine. And what we'll find, I hope, during the case studies is that all of these organisations that we're looking at, however big and successful they may be, all started off as simple organisations. It's one or two people selling stuff off a market stall in London, or programming a new system in their garage or their bedroom in Berkeley in California. We have a functional structure. A functional structure is when tasks are grouped into departments based upon similar skills and expertise. So we came to the conclusion, I think, last week that Coventry University has a functional structure. It's made up of departments. Each department does a particular job. We're all clear what our jobs are. We're clear what our jobs aren't. Functional structures then are grouped around job descriptions and titles. So we have the academic department, we have in Coventry University again, the international department, we have estates, we have HR and so forth. And there's very little slippage between the two. There are advantages of this, as we mentioned before. One of them is clear career paths, one of them is functional expertise, and one of them is economies of scale. So there is no duplication, and we can increase the scale without necessarily increasing the staff numbers. On the assumption that I could do it, we could quadruple the number of students on this module without increasing the number of lecturers. We might have to find some hospitalisation to support me at weekends when I'm exhausted, but generally speaking we can increase the number of students without increasing me, without increasing particularly the administrative staff, without increasing other functions. There are things that would need to increase, but they aren't necessarily the people concerned. There are disadvantages with that. One of them is that I'm very clear about my role and my responsibilities, and my fellow academics are very clear about our roles and responsibilities, and we're very clear about what aren't ours, and we don't like it particularly when we're impinged upon by others. So the admin team, for instance, are very clear about their tasks, are very clear about their responsibilities, very clear about their deadlines. And at times there is a slight tension, not a conflict, because we're all nice people and we've been doing this for a long time, but there is a slight tension sometimes between the deadlines imposed upon the admin team to get things done and the ability of the academic staff to meet those deadlines. So there are sometimes some little tensions. Rivalry sometimes is also something that you'll find in functional structures. An alternative then to functional structures is divisional structures. So generally speaking, once we get outside of the simple organisation, the one-man business, the family business, there are two main options. One is a functional structure and the other one is a divisional structure. So a divisional structure is when things are set and geared around outputs. So we have Mitsubishi, for instance, which is an organisation we'll look at in a few weeks' time, has a divisional structure. So it's made up of companies within Mitsubishi who do specific things. Coventry University is part of the Coventry University Group. Coventry University Group has a divisional structure. So there's Coventry University with one division. There's Coventry University Enterprises, which is another division. There's Coventry London Campus, which is another division. So these are very clear, and there's hardly any interchange between them. So examples of these would be companies where you have a worldwide organisation and you have a sales operation that's divided into America, Europe, and another one about looking at the Middle East and Asia. It's where you have a production facilities around the world. So you have a production division and a sales division, and then perhaps a marketing division. So when we look at McDonald's, we'll see that that's much more geared around divisional structures than around functional structures. As an example of that, this would be a product-based divisional structure where you've got an organisation that's geared around different types of product outputs. This isn't to say that there wouldn't be functional aspects to this organisation. It's simply to say that on an overall basis, it's what we would call a divisional structure. Here we have one where, for instance, might be a sales organisation where the company is geared around sales within different areas, and it might be a UK-based company with north, south and so forth, or it might be wider spread than that. Here we've got an organisation which is geared around different kinds of markets, so it gears itself around different types of customer bases. So in many sales organisations, what you'll find is a sales organisation that's split into general accounts who deal with smaller companies, major accounts who deal with larger companies, key accounts who deal with specific single companies. They'll have a whole team looking after one particular company, and then there'll be wholesalers and OEM type customers. So they have a different kind of structure, all reporting up, of course, to the same person. What we're not seeing here is any difference at the top. It's just the way the rest of it is geared and split up. So there are advantages to this, and generally speaking, it's about coverage, efficiency, and also it's a means by which people can move up the ladder in terms of career progression. There are disadvantages, and one of the disadvantages is that cost is duplicated. So various people in various locations are doing the same sort of thing. And when it comes to restructuring then, what you'll find is an easy way for a new chief executive officer to make an impact more or less immediately on a company that's not doing so well is just to reduce the structure, get rid of the duplication and reduce the numbers of people within those divisions. Matrix structures are always interesting. We don't do matrix structures so well in Europe. Matrix structures came really from Asia, where you have groups of people working together who don't necessarily work together in functional teams or divisional teams. They're just put together because in a particular project or a particular requirement, they have skills and abilities that suit that task. And they're put together in a group, reporting in various strands with a dotted line to various people, because they report to various people, perhaps around the world, for pay, for roles and job descriptions, but they report with a straight line function to a particular person that they're working with at that particular time for that particular project or task, and then will be dispersed. So here's an example of a matrix team where you've got people who are working together. They report to the sales, design and production team, but they're also part of product teams. So they'll have two employees, two managers looking after them, and it's the difficulty of the two managers working together and the communication between the two managers that has caused the problems in Europe. Because there is a cultural difference between, generally speaking, people in Europe and people in Asia, because we're much less team-oriented. Unlike historic organisations, which are either divisional or functional, and we can imagine them to be large, increasingly contemporary organisations are intrinsically small, with quite a lot of things going on that are subcontracted. So whereas companies used to do everything themselves, and we looked at the automobile industry, for instance, with the films, and saw the huge plants doing everything. Nowadays, most companies are managing a whole series of smaller offshoots or suppliers with a group of people who are working for them, but not necessarily on a full-time basis on a full-time contract. An example of this, again, would be McDonald's. So you have a core, which is McDonald's, and then a series of suppliers who feed into McDonald's, and then a group of employees who are potentially on 0 hours contracts. That's a very modern way of working. So we mentioned before one of the requirements of an organisation is to clearly define what the tasks and roles are for individual employees. There are a number of consequences of a poorly designed structure, and Childs suggests there are 5. Low morale, inappropriate decisions, conflict or poor coordination, poor responses to new opportunities and external change, and rising costs. And the reason that companies go in for organisational change and restructuring is an attempt to alleviate some of the difficulties they may have encountered with a different type of organisational structure. The issue always is there's no right answer. All organisations just survive from year to year, attempting to do the best that they can based upon the information, decisions and resources that they've got. There is no magic wand as to make a sound structure and a successful company. So there is recommended reading, chapter 5 of the book. You've all got the book. It's called Organising for Business, and the various other things to read. So, as I say, this is a kind of basic part of everything that we need to understand for this module. Wider reading is anything outside of the lectures. Reading the book is useful.